Good morning, Wake Forest Baptist. I'm going to share a devotion with you this morning that's about hearing God's voice. It's a very common question that a lot of us have, the question that a lot of us struggle with as well. Not only how do we hear God's voice, but oftentimes, why don't we hear from God? We find ourselves saying, God doesn't talk to me. I never hear him. Other people around us are super spiritual and have daily conversations with God. We find ourselves saying, I don't know what they're talking about. What gives? Why can't I hear God? It's much simpler than oftentimes we make it. It's really the shepherd principle that's taught by Jesus in John 10. If I can read this, I tell you the truth, the man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters the gate is a shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. When he has bought all of his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. This is very important. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize the stranger's voice. Jesus goes on to explain this a bit in verse 11. He said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees a wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and this is the important part. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not in this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. I was reading a little bit about the differences between Western shepherding and Near East shepherding, and it had to do mainly with where the shepherd was relative to the sheep. It says, unlike Western shepherds who drive the sheep from the side or behind, often using sheepdogs, Near Eastern shepherds lead their flock, their voice calling them to move on. This draws a remarkable picture of the master-principal or master-disciple relationship. New Testament spiritual leadership is always by example, i.e. a call to imitate conduct. And trying to understand this, an example might be back when malls were a thing before the internet. I remember going, say, in the Christmas season, and there's thousands of people milling about and hordes of shoppers. If someone were to yell out my name, I probably would not have a very good chance of understanding or paying attention to it because I didn't recognize their voice. There was too much going on. Their voice would be drowned out oftentimes. Strangely enough, though, when I was at the mall with my parents, my father had a way of getting my attention clear across the central area of the mall. I remember this happening often. Quite often he was on a different floor and he would whistle. It wasn't even really like a whistle. It was like more like a half whistle. It was, and for some reason, I could hear this through all the commotion of the mall and all the shoppers. So how does this relate to the shepherd principle? I think it's about the sheep's relationship to the shepherd and our responsibility to spend time in the Word, spend time praying, spend time setting aside daily time for God, This is where you start familiarizing yourself with his voice, and you come closer to that parable that Jesus was using in John 10, talking about him leading his sheep. It's through this daily quiet time where you're reading the Bible and you're praying to him and you're seeking his will intentionally. But most importantly, that's where you become familiar with the shepherd's voice. If you think about it, if I never spent time with my dad, if I never got to know his voice, if I never understood what his motivations were, his voice would get drowned out just like everyone else's. When we don't know the shepherd's voice, it gets drowned out by the noise of the world, by the noise of the enemy, and we can't hear him. My prayer for you is that you find time daily to familiarize yourself with his voice. That's when you start hearing from God. That's why it's so important to study the Word. The Word was given to us to teach us his character, his patterns, how he thinks, how he teaches, for us to get to know the shepherd. We start making decisions based on what we've read and studied, and our life becomes fuller because of that relationship with the shepherd. Hopefully you found this to be helpful, and I pray for all of you throughout the rest of this week, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.